transmission of knowledge, that we would take the facts that are in my head, we would crack open my head, we would pull what was in there out, and I would try to put it inside your head, and then you could regurgitate it out at a test or something like that. And the problem is that we know most of that's lost. To really thinking about how can we own this to the point that we actually have generalization of the skill or of the knowledge in a different setting, that we're able to use it in different kinds of ways. And that's when we know that learning really has taken place. And this learning in the networks, learning between the nodes, learning from each other in all different ways, of course, is very important. So who recognizes this diagram? All right, so this is Bloom's taxonomy, but it's been revised, and the people that studied underneath Bloom actually have taken this and tried to look at it. Other people are looking at, should it be scaffold or should it not be scaffold? Maybe there shouldn't be a hierarchy. But in the way that it's designed right here, it's where when you're thinking about the higher order thinking skills, you're really thinking about moving kids up into this area where they're applying, they're analyzing, they're evaluating, and they're creating. And these lower expectations are down here, the memorization of the content, and then maybe understanding it by actually using the content in some way where you're able to describe and apply and explain and get to the place where you can apply it. So we're really looking at kids becoming producers of knowledge and not just consumers of knowledge, moving them up to the top. Nicole, thanks for sharing that, because that's actually one of the next slides that I'm going to be showing you. And that's a good friend of mine, Andrew, has done a whole lot around taking Bloom's taxonomy and really 21st centralizing it. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. How many of you have heard of the Tpack model? You know what it is and you know a little bit about it. Would some of you grab the mic and maybe talk a little bit about the Tpack model? What is it and how is it used? Siobhan, did I see you smile at me about that? Do you want to talk about it, or I don't want to put you on the spot? Maybe someone else?
To be honest, I've seen the visual. I know Carla's used it, and so I'm not trying to put Carla under the gun, but I know I've seen it through some of the sessions that she's done, but I'm not extremely familiar with it.
So good. Thanks for doing that. So I'm glad that you pointed Carla out. Carla, you want to talk to us a little bit about Tpack?
No problem. I just didn't want to hog the mic. So Tpack, kind of in a nutshell, looks at basically kind of what I tell teachers anyways, is that it's a model for integrating technology into your curriculum. Here we always start with your curriculum, your curriculum objective. Thank you. I was just going to grab the magic hand. And then you kind of start thinking about, okay, what would be my best teaching style, learning preferences, all that pedagogical knowledge. You kind of can take that into consideration. And then we look at choosing a tool, a technology tool that would help support that learning. And sometimes there might not be the most appropriate one. I know Jan's going to weigh in here. So then, I do encourage teachers, don't use technology just for the sake of technology. Use it where it makes sense. We don't want it to feel like it's an add-on. It needs to be enhancing and enriching the learning. So I'll shut up and let Jan speak.
Yeah, Judy Harris is a good friend of ours and has come to our region a lot, Cheryl, so we're quite familiar with the model. And what's missing in this model is context. So for me, what the model we're looking at here is what is called teaching as a wicked problem. And I really love that, again, when we're talking about the dance, it shows the interplay between all of these areas. One area I'd like to just push back a little bit at, and in Judy's work in particular, is the technology piece, because there's lots of times when technology, is actually, if you look at Mishra and Kaler's most recent work about play, when some technology, there's disruptive technologies that pop up like the iPad, and they're game changers. And all of a sudden, you're starting with the technology, you know, and it helps you think in different ways about that content knowledge piece or the pedagogy piece. So it shifts everything. So I wouldn't, you know, so in that way, I am, you know, my thinking is not aligned with what Judy says about Tpack, but I interpret that model differently. But I think one of the most important parts of this model is context, because you know, a teacher has to work with all of these dimensions in the context of their work, their classroom, which is constantly shifting because of all the learners in there and their needs.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm gonna, Nicole's already headed out, but I want to push back on your thinking a little bit and maybe help you to think about Tpack in a little bit different way than even what Judy presents it. And so if you'll let me combine it together with the connected learner scale that I use, maybe you'll like it a little bit better. I see the Tpack model as nothing more than a guide that can help teachers when they're thinking about how to construct lesson plans in ways that will be very effective in terms of integrating the technology. What I really like about it is that it gets teachers thinking about how to use this so that you're looking at the relationship between these three things, that you're thinking about the content, the mandated curriculum, your state or your district or your government-sponsored curriculum. You're also thinking about the pedagogy, and the pedagogy being the way that you teach this particular curriculum. Excuse me just a minute.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's what I said. Maybe I didn't articulate it well, but I do really think that it's important to look at the interplay of all of them. And again, the context, I think, is critical. Carla? Oh, you're back.
Yep, I apologize. So, well, I thought I was back. Carla, you want to talk a little bit about the relation? There we go. Okay, we're good now. I apologize. I'm calling in from the home office tonight, and we had dogs run in from outside. So the main thing here is that you want to really think about the relationship between the content, the pedagogy, and the technology. Often when people are thinking about their curriculum, they'll think about their curriculum and they'll say, okay, we're trying to use technology now. That's the next great thing. So what I've got to do is I've got to think about a way that I can throw a technology in here so that I can put, there I've used blogs, or there I've used PowerPoint, or I use clickers. So I can put a check mark in my change agent box now. Ooh, I'm a technology user. And for me, what the Tpack model does is instead it helps you to think about the relationship between these three. So that if you're simply thinking about the relationship between the content and the pedagogy, the way that it's traditionally been, well, that's okay, but that's more a transmission of knowledge. And that if you're thinking about the relationship between the content and the technology, then you have to really consider, is this the appropriate tool for this particular content? And that if you're thinking about the relationship between the pedagogy and the technology, well, then you're really thinking about what changes, what kind of behaviors, or what kind of assessment, or what kind of classroom arrangement, what's going to change in the way that I do this now that I'm entering the technology into it. So it isn't just like you're doing, you know, where you're doing a technology simply as an add-on. So what we're trying for really is this sweet spot in the middle where we're thinking about technological, pedagogical content knowledge that's going to look deeply at the relationship between all of these. So I think the key thing here is that it's not just knowing how to use technology. Okay, I figured out how to use VoiceThread, so I'm going to throw VoiceThread into this lesson. Or kind of like in the past when people would say, how are you using technology? A teacher might say, well, the kids created PowerPoint presentations. And then you might say, okay, well, what are you teaching? She says, well, social studies. Then you'd ask another teacher, you'd say, so what technology are you using? She said, well, PowerPoint. And what are you teaching? Well, I'm teaching history. And that PowerPoint became the answer for the technology that everybody was using. And so if PowerPoint was always the answer, what was the question? And so instead, what Tpack will help you do is it'll help you to really think about what do you do with the technology that suits what we know to be best practice, or the way that kids or adult learners learn the best. How can I integrate it in that way? And I really think this diagram does a pretty good job because it looks at the 7 7 pieces of Tpack where it says you've got content, technology, and pedagogy. And so content they're doing is content knowledge. That's why you got a K. And then you look at the Venn diagram pieces like you ask yourself, okay, now what pedagogy, what strategies do I need to think about that's really going to deepen the learning experience when I combine it with this particular piece of content? So think, pair, share might work for one particular piece of content, but it wouldn't work at all for another one. It's absolutely the wrong choice. And those are the kinds of decisions that, as educators, we've traditionally made. But then when you add technology to the content, you have to think about, okay, is the content transformed by this use of this particular technology? And if it isn't, don't use it. You know, if pencil and paper would be better, if role play would be better, that's what you want to do. You have to think about, does this technology really transform it? And then when you think about the technology and the pedagogy, you really have to think about, okay, this technology can be a game changer. We'll use Jan's example. We're going to bring in an iPad, which can really be a game changer. I can't use the same, I'm going to lecture, you're going to sit in rows and columns and take notes while I use this technology. I really have to think about what needs to change about my delivery or what needs to change about the assessment. Do I need to let kids be working on their own? Do they need to be working in groups? Do I need to change up the content where they're learning and the strategies that I'm using so that they're learning about it in a project-driven approach so that I'm really getting the most out of the existing technologies? And I think that's important. So I think the strength of Tpack that often is overlooked is that you're really looking at the relationship piece. All right, but I do think, and let me jump over to this, and I'll come back to these right here, but I want to make my case, that I do think that where it really starts to change is when you add Tpack to what I call the connected learner scale. So I'm gonna play with you just a little bit if I could. I want you to type into the chat window the last thing that you saw someone teach or the last thing that you taught yourself.